I'm going to tell you a story that starts with a postcard. 3 years ago, my wife Shay and I took a trip to Japan. While we were at the Nishiki market in Kyoto, Shay found this set of postcards with these beautiful prints on them. I should note that my wife Shay is a full-time illustrator and graphic designer. We didn't know anything about the artist or the art at the time, but out of the thousands of prints and illustrations at this market, Shay was drawn to this set of postcards. We brought them home, and her favorite of the set she put in this tiny frame. So fast forward to a couple of weeks ago. We're in Atlanta, Georgia, at a used furniture store, thousands of miles away from Kyoto, and check out what we see. Not only is it the same piece of art, but it's an original signed print from the 1950s. What are the chances of all of the incredible art in Japan? We bring home this set of postcards, and just a few miles from our house, we find an original print signed by the artist. It's the weirdest coincidence, so we had to buy it. The artist's name was Tomikichiro Tokuriki, and it turns out he was actually one of the most famous Japanese woodblock artists from the 20th century. There isn't a lot of available information online about Tomikichiro, but here's what I did find. He was born in 1902 in Kyoto, which is the same city where we found those postcards. He was a 13th generation artist. He graduated from Kyoto Art College in 1923. He was a teacher as well as an artist, and he was well known for two styles of art. The first one was called the Shin Hanga style. In the Shin Hanga style, 4 people would work together. There would be the artist, the carver, the printer, and the publisher. If you wanted to become a carver, you'd have to spend 10 years before you could carve in the Shin Hanga style. If you wanted to become a printer, you'd have to study for 10 years before you could print in the Shin Hanga style. Usually these prints would be of landscapes or famous places and be in pastel-like color schemes. They'd be printed on a larger scale and sold. So it was a collective of people working together to carry out the vision of the artist, whereas the artist wouldn't have a hand in the final creation of the finished product. During his lifetime, Tomikichiro was more well known for his landscape prints in the Shin Hanga style, and they were beautiful on their own, but he was more passionate about his creative prints or his Susaku Hanga style prints. So what was different about the Susaku Hanga style is instead of 4 people working together to carry out the vision of the artist did everything themselves. So what this meant is maybe the artist didn't take 10 whole years to learn how to carve, or they didn't take 10 whole years to learn how to print. They just jumped in, and there were no rules. They could make art about anything, or they could use punchy, vivid colors. But I think the coolest thing is these artists distinguish themselves as artists who created art for art's sake. Supposedly our artist, Tomikichiro Tokuriki, said, "I'd rather do nothing but creative prints, but after all, I sell maybe 10 of them against 200 for a publisher artisan print." This really resonated with me. I think we all struggle with this to a certain extent, finding the balance between our creative work and our skilled work, or how we pay our bills. I'm not a Japanese art historian. I am not a philosopher. I'm a bass player, but I am feeling inspired by Tomikichiro's legacy, as well as his print that we came across by chance and now we have hanging in our home. So today what I'd like to do is to try and create a piece of music in the spirit of the Susaku Hanga style, meaning no rules, something that we create just for the joy of creating it, and something that I do each step of the process on my own. We're going to use this specific piece of art as our jumping off point for the creative process. I don't know what to expect or what sort of music we're going to come up with, but I am excited to see what happens. Now, that being said, I do want to ask the advice of my wife, Shay. She's an amazing visual artist. She'll be able to see some things in the art that I would not be able to see. And then maybe we can take some of those visual concepts and I can try and convert them into sound concepts. Let's give it a try.
I was really drawn to these postcards because the colors were really bold and strong, and they just caught my eye immediately. And the reason these colors are just really popping is because there's minimal information. The scene has been reduced to include only what is necessary to imply the space. So I just loved the strong colors, and I also loved a couple of these tiny little details that are happening. The little negative space to show these wooden slats, a couple of little extra brush strokes to show the tops of these lanterns. It just was all working so nice with the combination of line work and flat shapes. Man, this specific piece just really drew me in, and I think some of it is probably the curvature of this path. I just wanted to go down this path to this temple, and what's funny is there are only just a handful of colors, but clearly this artist knew what they were doing to create a composition just to draw the viewer in.
So that was the postcards, but here's the original print. Is there anything you can tell us about this?
Sure. Well, the thing that I love so much, again, is the minimal amount of colors. So we have blue, red, yellow, brown, and black, and then using white as just the base layer, which is the color of the paper. Something else that I really like is the use of these black lines to help guide the viewer's eye. So we start down here and you have these angles, and then they lead you up around the branches, and then you come right down through the bark and you just come right back again, all sort of leading you back to the center. Such a good composition. Something else that I'm also digging about this is the imperfection. So you'll see that there's a little overlay happening with this blue and this yellow here, and that's because of a misalignment, but it's really cool because it creates a new color, green. I also really like that the main shapes don't have a ton of detail cut into them, and I think a lot of that is due to the medium that this was made. These shapes were carved on a wood block, so you can only get so much detail in there, but because they're not super detailed, the color is just wham, laying on so thick.
If you imagine a piece of music representing this, is there anything that would come to mind?
I feel like that's your job.
Fair enough. A few of the things that are jumping out at me now, we have our 5 colors. So I think it could be cool to use just a few layers. I also think it's cool that just the information needed is there. Another cool thing is the composition takes you on this journey, like your eye goes in the circle, like Shay was saying, like you follow different lines and you're led to one point, and it sort of resolves itself as you're looking. So we could have a chord progression that has a nice cadence or resolution to it as it rotates around. And then another cool thing is the imperfections, or the human element. And you're literally carving into wood by hand and then using that to press an image or a layer of colors onto paper. So there are little human elements. Try and create those sort of color bleed sort of thing Shay was referencing, like where the colors might meet, there might be a new color is formed. So to me, that could be cool to explore, like a little bit of pitch bending or a little bit of modulation. I am watching videos on Japanese woodblock printing, which I'll share in the description. It is amazing to see these artisans work. I really don't know very much at all about this Japanese art form. I don't want to sound pretentious and say I understand it well enough to try and create music based on it. I just feel really inspired by it. So yeah, I think now it's time to sit down at the piano and start exploring chord progressions. I think that's going to be a good place to start. Here we go. I mean, that up to that is nice. Feels very predictable. See, I don't think it needs a minor 4. This is hard. Nothing feels right. I feel like I'm looking at this beautiful thing and everything that I'm doing is just falling short of it. So I'm not really sure what to do next. So I've been thinking, this print was made during the 1950s and the 1960s, right? And then I was thinking, what was going on with music history during that time? And there was so much change going on. Change of what was accepted, change of what was cool. Then there was also a huge amount of change in what was going on with music technology, right? So we're getting new sounds. And I'm reminded in this print we have these bright, punchy, angular sort of colors layered one by one, right? Well, at the time, Bob Moog is pioneering synthesis, right? He released his first Moog synthesizer, I think in 1963 or 1964. The synthesizer was a new, bright, punchy strange color, if you will. So I think it could be cool to explore composing with a synthesizer. There's polyphonic synthesis, which is where you can play multiple notes at a time. My synthesizer and most of the synthesizers in the 1960s, 1970s are what you call monophonic synthesizers, which means you can only play one note at a time, which is a challenge if you're trying to arrange music one note at a time. But I'm reminded of the block printing method, which is where you would print one color at a time, one layer at a time. You piece them together, and then everything comes together in the end as one image. So I think it could be cool to try writing this piece using a monophonic synthesizer.